Hi everybody, and thank you very much for making some time for us today. Welcome to our webinar, which is tips to maximize efficiency and minimize costs with your healthcare translation. We're very lucky to be joined with some great speakers today. We have first up Jennifer Day.
Good morning.
She is our health care account manager here at Clear Language. Jennifer works every day with a number of major clients within this specific field, to help us understand, the needs, the requirements. She helps bring solutions to bear, so that she really understands, the day-to-day transactional requirements of accounts. Hopefully, represent some of what the challenges people on the webinar are facing. And we also have Leslie Iberg, who is our healthcare marketing at Clear Language.
Hello.
And Leslie works across the industry at more at an industrial level to work out, what are the trends, what are the emerging themes and challenges around translation within the healthcare. I'm the moderator. My name is Nick McMahon, and I'll be guiding you through our agenda today. So just a quick overview of that. We have tips and tools to save time and money. We have ensuring quality, compliant LEP plans, and summaries and QA at the end. So we'll have plenty of time for questions. At any point, please do go ahead and type in questions. We very much appreciate any activity you can give us and the involvement you can give us. So if you've got a question, something's not quite clear, just type it into the chat panel and we will try to address it either as we go, or if it's more of a generalized question, we'll come to it at the end when we summarize. So without further ado, I'll hand over actually to Leslie here, who can help take us through our first subject matter.
Wonderful. Thanks, Nick, and thanks everyone for coming today. So just to give a basic overview of the challenges healthcare professionals are facing today with meeting language access needs and communicating with the populations, we start off with growing diversity. Obviously, there's populations here in the United States that are diversifying quickly, and even within those populations, there's great diversity within regional dialects, regional differences, and regional nuances. So understanding the diversity within our diverse populations is really proving to be a challenge. We also have shrinking budgets. I'm sure it's no surprise that everyone's budgets here are not getting any bigger, and yet the needs are only getting bigger. So keeping up with your needs while trying to do so in a more cost-effective manner is certainly proving to be another challenge. Mounting regulatory pressures between the ACA, Affordable Care Act, healthcare reform, CMS requirements, Medicaid, Medicare. Of course, there's mounting pressure for healthcare organizations to really meet these regulations and become compliant. And then, of course, we have limited time. Really, who has enough time to handle these needs and do so effectively with everything going on and all the pressure they have to become compliant?
So generally, it seems like it's a classic sort of trifecta of a group of things coming together. You've got shrinking budgets, you've got increasing requirements, both regulatory and from the diversity base of the membership, and then fewer time. So that all comes together, which is no doubt why everybody is on the webinar today. And with that in mind, I think we wanted to go to a question here, and we're going to push out a quick poll to get a feel of where everybody is. And so the question we're going to put out to you now is, what is your largest challenge when managing healthcare translations? So, when you think about this trifecta challenge, is it budget? Is it knowledge of current new requirements? Is it time? Is it resources? Or is it something else? And we're just going to take a few seconds there to collate our results, and then I will share those results with everybody. Okay, so I'm going to push out the results so everybody can see those. And so it looks like, as expected, we've got a pretty good spread across everything there, with time taking a slight lead. So that's great information for us too. And as we go through the slides, we'll try to bear that in mind and relate it back to some of those core issues. Okay, so let's move on to our next topic, which is optimizing your translation efforts. I'm going to hand over to Jennifer.
Well, first we're going to start with the source. The source is something that you can edit. It's a native file that allows for the extraction and the importing of text for translation. Without a source such as a PDF, the cost and time for translation is increased, as it can become a heavily manual process of recreating the original document. In addition, in using such files as InDesign or FrameMaker, it's essential to have links, graphics, and fonts. You'll see in the next slide why these are so crucial.
Yeah, and I think the source, really picking up on that source, a good takeaway is that there's not, you're talking about a cost differential of like up to 9x. So if I give you the source InDesign file versus a PDF that then has to be recreated, that's a source differential of about 9x. So you're going to pay a lot more for not keeping hold of that source, not making that source available when you want to update it and provide additional translation. Okay, so let's have a look a bit more at this fonts issue.
Great, thanks. So LEP, or Limited English Proficiency populations, use a variety of different languages and fonts, but aside from your typical Roman or Latin characters. These can include Latin or Perso-Arabic, which is right to left font, Cyrillic, Khmer. You'll see here on the top some obvious text corruption. It's very essential to have the fonts included with your translation project when you send it off to a translation vendor, because you'll notice here on top the corruption between the Armenian and Khmer text lines. You can notice on the left is certainly different from the correct text and fonts on the right. But also you want to work with a vendor that has visibility in native speakers that can identify more subtle text corruption. We'll look at this example here on the bottom. The top sentence is Vietnamese. To the non-Vietnamese speaker, it may look like it's correct. However, the bottom line is actually the correct line using the correct font. If you'll notice here, we'll highlight the changes, the subtle changes that only a native speaker or professional translation vendor should pick up on.
And so this is not a translation. This is not a direct translation problem. This is just because the font was wrong?
Correct, exactly, Nick. It's because the correct fonts were not used when they created the sentence. So if you notice on the bottom, the Vietnamese example, the bottom one is the correct one. However, using an incorrect font will only look slightly different than the correct one. However, of course, it's not a valid sentence.
Yeah, and even on the Armenian and Khmer, it's actually relatively hard for me to look at. I'm not familiar with those languages.
Unless you speak Armenian. So
that's where the linguistic specialist really comes in. But even something like a font correction, it's not just character corruption. Like just by using the wrong font, you can get the wrong text coming out the other end.
Exactly.
Okay. So another great area is file organization. I know this comes up really frequently across our client base. And so, Jennifer, perhaps you could give us a little bit of information around that.
Absolutely. Organize and centralize how and where your files are stored. Healthcare has lots of updates. If they're organized, it can be easy and effective to update it. If you're using several vendors and no one has a structure of files, it can take as long as the job just to find it and send it out. Well, partial folder structure is a suggestion. Organize and centralize how and where your files are stored. This includes naming the files, the file structure, and it greatly helps with version control and change management. It's essential to have the English source translated document and a locked PDF, which will preserve the original document. How many clients don't think ahead or don't keep English translated versions together, often causing duplication and unnecessary time, money, and stress?
Yeah, I agree, and I definitely know from our project managers, this comes up really frequently, Jennifer, where people are sort of, you've got an urgent job, and you're like, okay, I've got to get this job out, I've got to get it turned around. Typically, it's a relatively small job, maybe it's a benefits letter or something like that, and you go to do the translation, and the source file just isn't available. So you're either going to retranslate from scratch, which takes additional time, or you're going to spend a lot of time finding that. And although I think this is one of the more simple ideas, this is probably one of the most common challenges that come up when people are trying to go and interact with a global membership. So really knowing where that source material is so you can quickly access it, provide that out to your translator resources, your linguistic service providers, and then allow them just to get on with the translation that's required. It's often one of the biggest reasons why projects are delayed.
Right.
If we start to think about cost, there's another good hint here. Yeah, so if we're thinking about bundling translations, what's the net impact of bundling your translations?
Well, the big benefit is in bundling your translations, you can get a total of 500 words in a bundled translation versus 5 small translations where you could get 100 words per document. in bundling your translations, say your target language is Spanish, your turnaround time is going to be 2 days per document, up to 10 documents in total, versus in a bundled translation where it's 2 days total. So the cost is going to be $110 on a bundled translation versus $550 on 5 small translations. So it's definitely a big benefit to try to bundle up your translation.
Yeah, absolutely. We're managing our supply base, getting those into a good, good batch of material they can work on consistently for 4, 5, 6 hours at a time makes a huge difference, because otherwise it's, you see a lot of inefficiency trying to spin up a translator to do maybe 100 words and then spin them down again, spin them up again, a few hours later to do 100 words, spin them down again. If you can give them in a block, even if they're separate jobs, as you can see from this table that Jennifer's put together, there really is a major cost differential. And here we're talking about 5x the cost by just grouping them together. And there's no formal requirement around the grouping. It's okay to do that as much as or as little as you need to. But it's more the takeaway is do it wherever you possibly can, because that's going to reduce a whole bunch of money. Okay, so where else can we save time and money?
So 2 primary tools that are essential to save time, money, and stress down the road are glossaries and style guides. So glossaries are very important language tools. They ensure consistent terminology is employed throughout your documents and translations. So you'll see here on the example above, it shows how multiple options exist in Spanish for the single English term, hospice. All those options are grammatically correct and can be used in certain situations. However, glossaries can align the correct Spanish translation for the English term when you want to use it. It also ensures that all translators are going to consistently use your preferred terminology in the specific case. On the bottom, we're going to see a sample style guide, which style guides are very important and equally as important as glossaries because they're used to communicate your organization's stylistic preferences. For the style guide, organizations can capture and convey the most meaningful elements of their communications, and they can standardize it within this guide to make sure that it's always consistent and accurate in all future translations. So we'll see here an example, anything from a literacy level to voice and tense, acronyms, etc., can all be documented in a style guide, and you never have to worry if what style the translators are using if it's all documented within these guides.
And then within the style guide, can that help me incorporate different approaches for different part of my membership, or am I just sort of stuck with one view for everybody?
Oh, by no means, of course not. You can definitely have style guides for different communications, for different memberships, etc. You really just document when you want to use a certain style or a term. If you're using a glossary, you can really just help your organization stay when they want to use a certain style or term in a certain situation.
Yeah, so if I was communicating internally, sort of for internal use around member benefit, then maybe I use one style. And if I'm going to go externally and I'm speaking directly to the member, maybe in my style guide I have a different set.
Definitely, we see that a lot.
Great, great. Okay, so let's talk about translation memory. I know for anyone in localization, translation memory comes up like a ton. It's a fundamental tool. But I know that when you're not used to dealing languages day in, day out, then translation memory still can be a little bit of an anathema. But you're going to clarify some of that for us, Jennifer.
Right. Thank you, Nick. Translation memory. It's a software that the translator uses that tracks all words translated for matching and for reuse. It saves you money. 100% matches equals proofreading charges only. It increases consistency in your translation, and it saves you a lot of time. You'll see on this slide that it's a before and after example of the translation memory and how it works. It's a database tool that allows you to save on future translations by essentially recycling previously translated segments and applying them for future use when you use them again. So it can be a great benefit.
And then I often hear the term machine translation, Google comes up a lot as well. Is this the same type of technology as Google Translate, or is this different?
This is different.
And that's because all of this content is human, it's all developed at human quality, it's by humans. So
right, exactly.
Okay, so even though, in the example you provided here, then, so on the left is my source term,
right.
So that's the sentence that's come out of the document that I want to be translated, and then on the right, that's a translation provided by a human at some previous point.
Right, exactly.
Okay, and then it can just be reused. So it's sort of computer-aided, but it's for human-assisted translation.
Right, exactly.
And I know from a cost point of view at a business level, when you're applying this translation memory, it can impact the cost of a project, an update, very significantly. So, even to the tune of like 80%, or higher. And so getting these translation memories in place making sure they're updated, making sure that, whichever vendor I work with has a policy and a strategy around them, really has a dramatic impact on my net cost, my total cost of doing that translation. Okay, so perhaps we can just sum up a little bit some of the core concepts here.
Sure. So just to recap the tips and tools we just went over with, first off, it's very important to start with your source document. Make sure you have an editable or unlocked file that the translation vendor can get into and use to translate. And make sure you do include the correct fonts, links, graphics, etc. with that. Secondly, organize your files. Make sure you have a system in place to organize your previously translated files or your newly translated files and the English source document to refer to in the future. Bundle your translations. As you saw, it's very important in terms of saving money to bundle your translations versus just sending them in individually. And also utilize translation memory and the other tools such as the glossaries and style guides that we mentioned.
Excellent. So now I'm going to test my technical ability too. We're going to go for poll number 2. First one went really well, so I'm going to go to this next one. And I'm going to push out another poll for everybody. And this one is, what translation tools or resources do you currently use, or most commonly use rather? So some of the things we've spoken about here, and we're going to start to now go to more around the process. But here we have glossaries, translation memories, community reviewers, other, and nothing right now. So we'd love to get your input, see which things are being used most commonly. And just while we're waiting for those to collate, we picked up that time issue. And all of these things here, all of these summary items here, speak to that time issue. So you get the right source document, you can start translation faster, you can get it back quicker. You organize your files, and you know where your source materials, your source graphics are. You don't just send a PDF through, but you actually have the source material. That's going to get it, straight away. We can start translation and get it back to you much faster. Same with bundling your translations, you can do more quicker. And so all of these directly impact, that time issue and actually also the cost. And we're getting good answers here on the poll. So I know you are all dying to see the results. So I'm going to go ahead and close that, and then I'll push those out to you so you can get off the edge of your seat. Okay, so there you go. So hopefully you can see that. So it looks like, again, it's interesting. Again, it's sort of like, it's roughly split, but there is an important difference there in terms of like other nothing right now, 14%. So it looks like glossaries, translation memories, and community review, are actively in use across the groups. So that's great to know. And we're going to incorporate that as we start to look at the next round of slides. And then for those of you put other, if you want to share that with us, in the panel, we can share that with the wider group. So you can type that into your chat, we can collate it here, and then we can release that here at the end of the slide set. So we'd love to know what other tools are being used out there. Okay, so moving on, let me just close out those poll results. Okay, so ensuring quality communication. So now we've talked about the time and the cost and how to get that down. How do we make sure the quality is there and that we're really able, in this multilingual sense, speak to our non-English speaking audiences? How do we make sure that quality is there, Leslie?
Well, first off, it's very important to recognize your audience's cultural filters. And by this, we mean audiences view the world and your communications through their own cultural filter. So for really truly effective communications, you need to know the region, nuances, terminology styles, literacy levels, country of origin, religions, politics of your audience, and really align your communication to these elements. Within this, it's very important to provide your supplier or translation vendor details on the target audience, including their background, their regions, etc., any insight you have, so the communications are made as most effective as possible.
Great, okay. And then another one that's very specific to healthcare, I think, is literacy levels. So Jennifer, can you give us a bit of insight on literacy and how to address literacy?
Absolutely. Address the health literacy levels. Clear and concise sentences, writing 4th to 6th grade literacy levels, and show versus tell. First off, there's difficulties in English speaking inappropriate health literacy levels. The National Adult Literacy Survey revealed that 90 million Americans who have difficulty comprehending medical information, 47% have low or limited literacy levels. LEP are disproportionately affected by this, and translators can only reduce by second grade levels.
So as you go to a multilingual audience, then the translator actually can go through a process to reduce down by 2 grade levels. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so if you've got something that's very appropriate and meaningful for a lower proficiency level within the English market, then the translator can also lower that or maintain that level within the translation cycle. So it's totally reasonable to ask your vendor to make sure that it is appropriate for a specific target audience and to take into account this 4th to 6th grade literacy level within that market. And that helps a lot because then they can understand the membership instructions and guidance. There's less need for dialogue back and forth as they become frustrated as a member, so they're not really being able to understand and use the material that you've gone to the expense and time of releasing for them. So getting it to the right literacy level, not just putting content after content after content piece out there, is a key takeaway for successfully delivering the right quality of communications out to your target audience. So another thing that comes up a lot is community reviews.
Right, and actually continue on what Jennifer was saying about literacy levels. Community reviews are a great way to test literacy levels of your target audience. The community reviewers can ensure cultural and linguistic accuracy, and they can also help verify if your messages capture and convey the original meaning with your target audience. They can eventually reduce the total cost of localization by ensuring the most accurate, effective communications the first time. They can help with member buy-in with the style and content. Like we said, they test literacy levels of the audience, and they can really just gauge the effectiveness of your materials. However, we recommend strongly to choose your community reviewers wisely. Some things to look for and to ask yourself is if the community reviewers, if they're a native speaker, how extensively have they studied the target language as well as English? Many people can say they studied a foreign language in high school or college, but that you definitely would not want to use them to test your Russian audience with translating health insurance information, for example. So it's very important just to make sure you have an accurate sense on the target audience so you can select the best community reviewers to test and ensure your messages are effective.
And I think both the community reviewers and also your selection of an OSP or a language service provider, so a professional agency that's going to do translation for you, really trying to get to the, it's very easy because language often comes at the end of a cycle or a process, so there's a lot of pressure, there's a lot of time pressure in terms of, okay, get out the door. And it's very easy to find somebody that just does speak French or just does speak Russian. And the problem is, that's okay. Certainly, a lot of people will explore that level, so you can explore it and see if it works. But it's the challenge comes is, are they really industry aware? Do they really know the regulatory requirements? Are they auditable from a service delivery point of view, so they can give you an attestation or something like that that really shows that this group of people, whoever you're going to use, is certified or capable of doing the task at a quality of communication that you need and expect that will enable you to communicate with your membership. And another key area here with total cost, you mentioned the total cost of localization, translation, and I think that's a good area to focus on too.
Right, absolutely. Choosing the right vendor can reduce the total cost, definitely. You want to choose a vendor with language experience, a vendor that has technical subject matter expertise. Check with your vendor to find out what kind of references they have, what kind of healthcare providers that they work with, facilities they work with. One with technology and with total cost of localization. Use teams specialized in healthcare that employ second and third reviewers, ones that use glossaries and community testing reviews. This is all important for the bottom line in reducing the total cost.
Yeah, and I think like anything in any sort of regard, like it can be very, and this is not definitively, just to be really clear, a pitch for the language specifically. This is true for whatever solution you're putting together. But languages definitely suffer from it a great deal in terms of I'm trying to service a language membership, non-English speaking language membership, and I've got this time, I've got this, this cost pressure, and I can easily just look at the cost of translation as that invoice to whichever resource I've incurred. But if that membership document fails to communicate, and doesn't, engage your membership or doesn't get across the information, the membership's going to ring back, they're going to ring into support lines, they're going to add additional support burden to your organization as they struggle to work out, what was really intended here, what are my real, accessibility rights and, and requirements from the membership. And so you start to incur costs from a language point of view in all sorts of different ways, just as you would for an English-speaking market. If you don't service that English-speaking market well, they'll find other ways into your organization, other costs. Maybe you're going to have to redo that work. If they don't use translation memory from a language point of view, you're probably translating documents each and every time. So if it was 100 words to start with, next version's 100 words, version after that, 100 words. If you're using translation memory, first version will be 100 words, next version will be 20 words, because you can reuse what you translated previously. So trying to step back and think of this holistic total cost of localization as you work out your solution is a much better judge of where you're doing well and where you still have challenges in your overall supply chain around languages. Okay, so next up we have tips to stay current with growing regulations, which
well, speaking of challenges, this is definitely one of the top challenges. Everyone is probably aware of the matching regulations, including the Affordable Care Act and other state or local or regional national regulations requiring language access services. So this is kind of a big snapshot of great tips. I want to let everyone know we're sending out a link to a wonderful brief we created that has all these links and more and additional tips to really stay current and maintain compliance. But really to start off with this, the main tips for building an effective LEC plan, we strongly recommend just thoroughly assessing your audience's needs. Think back to the cultural filters. Really, what are the aspects that you want to consider? Really consider each of your target audiences and what cultural filters they view the world from. This should really include especially their country of origin, their regional dialect, especially their literacy levels, and their communication preferences. Certain populations or generations may prefer everything in their native language. Maybe a second-born Spanish speaker might want things in bilingual materials they can share with a parent or grandparent. The younger populations might also want more digital or mobile communication. It's really just a matter of knowing your audiences and assessing their communication needs and desires. Also, it's important to provide notice of language services. So information about any of the language services you're providing, interpreters, translators, etc., should be made communicated to your populations in writing or verbally, orally, perhaps in radio or TV promotions, etc. Also, any vital forms or documents should be translated in their native language, including application enrollment forms, letters or notices of eligibility or benefits, anything basically requiring a response or patient consent. And finally, monitor and update your plans regularly. Really review and analyze and make amendments or adjustments as needed depending on how effective your campaigns or communications were.
Yeah, a minor point, but I thought it was amusing to me, but obviously probably because I'm in this industry. I remember I was looking at a member services website the other day, and it sort of said click here to see this site in Spanish. And I was, if you wanted to see it in Spanish, you're actually supposed to put that in Spanish.
Right.
And so I don't think that happens too often, but every now and again I have seen that sort of thing. And obviously, any advice of language services that are available should obviously be in the target audience language.
Definitely. Well, and everyone knows those kind of materials are hard enough to understand in English. So imagine someone coming to the U.S. with very little experience with the health insurance industry. It's very important to kind of acknowledge their experience and background, and really communicate at a level that they can understand and appreciate.
Yeah, and you may tell from my accent for people on the phone, but it's like I'm from England, and I remember coming here and first reading, membership notices and advice and details of benefits and explanation of benefits, things like that. It really is terrifying, even with a good proficiency level in English.
Right.
It's a very different process when people come to America.
Great.
Okay.
So here, we have a couple links to check federal websites. Obviously, the Patient Protection Affordable Care Act or Affordable Care Act is still kind of being rolled out. There's an implementation website with a link we provided here. A couple other resources and websites for you to constantly monitor and check out. I think the important thing here is to know that things are always changing, so it's important to keep tabs and have someone that can really check in with growing regulations or changing regulations as far as threshold languages or populations or dates and timelines, etc. And also check your state health exchange websites. We have a sample here of California State website, but check your own state to see what kind of regulations or changes or dates are being updated there. And again, we'll send this presentation and a white paper out afterwards with all this information and more.
And even being very active in the industry, trying to work out exactly what's happening at any given time, is a pretty much a full-time sort of job in its own way. And so, using these links and trying to stay current, we were trying to work out what do we put on this slide, but really a case of like going back to the source material, and using your own organizational perspective to interpret, the requirements, and understand the impact for your specific target membership. But investing some time in that, making sure you have an awareness of that is great. Certainly when you do form a vendor relationship with an LSP, we find quite often our project managers will start to go back to our clients because they know their membership and they know their outlook, and they will help them dialogue through this. But it is pretty specific, and putting the time and effort into researching that stuff directly from the source is the best practice. Okay, so if we put all that together, what we're looking at in this part is organization and preparation. That's what we're focused on in that first place. That's where your time, and your costs are really going to get impacted. People always come to, or not always, but most often come to language as an afterthought. So they don't have the source material, they don't have the file organization, they don't have things ready to go for translation, but they're feeling the burden and pressure of getting it turned around very fast. So if you're going to be supporting languages, we would strongly recommend, putting the effort into, that organization, that, finding those source files and developing your approach to languages. And I would say, like, even if you're not going to, you don't know whether you're going to translate into, let's say, Vietnamese and Chinese, but you may translate into Vietnamese and Chinese, get a consistent structure that will allow you to do that. So organization and preparation, you're going to hit cost, you're going to hit time. There's two major deliverables back to you by investing in that upfront. Selecting the right teams. Don't underestimate what it means to be a language expert, especially in an industry that's highly regulated. So find the right teams. Go through. People have luckily very extensive RFP processes. If you ever want advice or input into what should be included into an RFP, we're more than welcome to help you through that process and help give you guidance on the sort of questions that we see occurring regularly. But getting the right teams is very, very important. Quality and reviewing, involving your membership, making sure that you've got that right resource that's capable of understanding at an industrial level what's required, and then involving your membership to really give you quantitative and qualitative feedback on, like, is this message hitting home? Is it the right literacy level? Do you understand this? It's a great way to stop additional support impact or frustration from your membership, and it's going to reduce that total quality, that total cost down. So, it's a way to address that total cost, so you're not saving on your translation, but then getting increased support costs on the back end, or redo costs on the back end. And then finally, regulatory consideration. Anytime you're supporting languages, especially around the recent changes with PPCA, somebody needs to be spending time, whether you're going to use a vendor for that or whether you're doing it internally. Somebody does need to be spending time visiting those sites, downloading the latest information and going through and trying to work out, okay, so what does this mean for my specific organization? So, schedule that in, factor it in, make sure it's visible to everybody in your supply chain that, like internal management included, this is a time that is well spent and required to keep everybody up to date and on track from a compliance, regulatory compliance point of view. Okay, so now we are getting a few questions in here, and so we're just going to collate those, so perhaps just give us a few seconds, and then we will come back to you with the questions that have come from listeners. Okay, so first up here we have, should we bundle translations of the same document or of the same language? It does depend a little bit on your supply base. So it depends on whether you have what's called a multilingual vendor set, so somebody that can do multiple languages at once. So via language, we actually will operate up to 137 languages. And so, for us it doesn't matter so much whether you're collating it by language. But I would say if you're using SLVs or single language vendors, so you're using one specific resource for Spanish, another specific resource for Chinese, then that type of breakdown by language is going to make a lot of sense. The important thing, the important takeaway is getting a volume of content. So translators will translate about 2,000 words a day. If you deliver less than 2,000 words a day, then you're going to you're not getting the maximum efficiency. Now, most people, can't necessarily do a full 2,000 words a day for these ad hoc type projects, but just try to get it to whatever you can, whatever makes sense for your business. So if you can get 2 jobs grouped, you're going to get a benefit. If you can get 5 jobs grouped, you're going to get a bit more of a benefit. But you've got to work out your flow and your mechanism and your requirements, but just try to group it to a level that makes sense for your business. And the more you group it, the more you're likely to save in terms of cost and time. Okay, so we have another question up here. What recommendations do you have on ways to verify competency of in-house staff to translate, besides certifications like ATA? I think there are two levels of it. One is I would recommend an external review. There is something called LISA, which is Localization Industry Standards Authority. That's LISA. The authority now is unfortunately disbanded, but they did leave behind their quality standards, and that's a good way to understand, the general quality from a professional linguistic point of view. So throughput, type of errors, type of challenges, knowledge around a specific industry, and it helps categorize the type of errors so that you can get more of a quantitative view of the quality output. So I think using something like a LISA standard is good. I also think, taking content that they've reviewed to a targeted community review. So once you've got some translation, try to get that reviewed by, 3 or 4 other people to give some sort of qualitative feedback around, style. Is this the style that's required? Do they exhibit a knowledge of the industry? And you don't need to open up, really widely. I think, 2 or 3 is probably okay. 3 or 4 is probably slightly better. But just at the initial onset of that relationship, try to open it up to a wider review. And then, maybe on an ongoing basis after that, as a professional agency, that's what we do. As an ongoing, we have this initial review stage that we put our translators through, and then on an ongoing basis, we submit them to sort of quarterly LISA review audit. Okay, so we've got another one up here, hopefully, and if any of this doesn't answer your questions, you can type them back in. We'll try to give more clarity. Another question here is, should a community reviewer be located within our company? No, not at all. There's no need for that. You have a variety of choices. So actually trying to go out to some of your community members, through a blog, through a website, things if there isn't any active. Typically, people rate about 1% of what we call super users or super active users within a community. So it's not a very high number. But you might find people that are willing to help support you. Maybe there's some sort of benefit and return you can provide to those community members too. But that's one alternative, looking for an active community user set within your overall community. And again, I would look for about 1%. That's typically normal. And then beyond that, you can also use a language service provider. So even if you don't want them to translate or do a large amount of translation, they could help on an ad hoc review basis, maybe for an hour here or an hour there too. So that's also a service you could look to an LSP to provide. And I would probably stick to your community rather than going to any translator at large, because translators, the vast majority of content in the wider translation industry is corporate and document translation, and so it's not necessarily healthcare. And they would have a very different style and a very different approach. So I would tend to stick to an industry-specific LSP, or look for the super active user within your own community.
Right. Just to add on to that, Nick, religious organizations within the cultural community can be a great way to test your community. For example, a lot of Hispanic or Catholics, so going to a Catholic church that's heavily attended by Hispanics or Latinos would be a great way to get a sense on your communications and test the community reviewers there. And
great idea.
Other community organizations, libraries, cultural centers would be also a great start.
Yeah. Okay. And then another question here is, how much does TM cost? Where do I get it? So purchase a license of a translation memory tool varies. If you're going to use an in-house translation model, but you've got in-house linguists, then license costs for a translation memory tool vary from about $1,500 per license up to about $5,500 per license. Deja Vu is a great tool at a reasonable cost. And then Trados is another tool at a reasonable cost. That's Deja Vu. and Trados. They're two great tools that are out there. There are others, but they're good tools if you want to start to have a look. If you use a vendor, then typically the vendor will absorb the cost of licensing, and you wouldn't have to pay any additional cost for licensing. They're going to use that. If they're a good vendor, they should be using that as part of the process for working, as a partner with you. And so if you're using a language service provider or an LSP, there shouldn't be a cost. If you're trying to use translation memory internally, which is still a great idea and definitely a best practice, then you're looking at a per user license cost of between $1,500 and $5,500. And Deja Vu, Trados are good directions to have a look at. Okay, and then one more question. No? Okay, so it looks like we've caught up with our questions. I don't think we have any more for now. So what we'll do is we will send out an email which will include a link to a copy of this webinar so that everybody will have availability to it. That's one of our most frequently asked questions is, will we get a copy? And you will. And there's also some information you can learn more about us at Dear Language or on Twitter and Facebook. So we'd love to speak to you. We'd love to hear more of your questions. And we'd love to get more specific on any of the challenges you have. And otherwise, I thank our presenters today, Jennifer.
Thank you.
And Leslie. And I thank you very much for attending. Okay, thanks. Have a great day.